are seeing now is real footage from the Battle of Berlin during World War II. On April 20, 1945, the Soviet Red Army launched the second phase of its attack on the German capital, Berlin. At the time, around 2.5 million Soviet soldiers were involved in the offensive. The first phase of the offensive had begun on April 16, about 60 kilometers, 37 miles, southeast of Berlin, along the Oder River. The battle started with an intense Soviet bombardment. Thousands of artillery pieces and Katyusha rocket launchers relentlessly struck German positions. Millions of Soviet soldiers advanced day and night to encircle Berlin. After the final attack began, it took the Red Army 3 days to break through the Germans' advanced defensive lines. Berlin was not just the capital of Germany but also Hitler's last stronghold and the final defensive line of the German army. At the time, around 800,000 German soldiers still defended the city, but most of them consisted of elite SS units, a few remaining tanks, and hastily formed Volkssturm militia. However, the Germans were already exhausted and disillusioned with the war. Even the German army recognized its own strategic failures. Internally, Germany was in total collapse. Compared to the early years of the war, the German forces had lost both their combat effectiveness and technological superiority. Meanwhile, the Soviet Red Army had grown stronger, outnumbering and outnumbered the Germans. During the Battle of Berlin, the Soviet army held a 3-to-1 advantage in both manpower and artillery over the Germans. As the second phase of the attack began, the fighting became extremely intense. By April 26, 1945, the battlefield situation showed Anglo-American forces advancing from the west, while the Soviets intensified their assault on Berlin. Despite fierce German resistance, it became clear that the Third Reich was on the brink of collapse. During the siege, Soviet artillery deployed nearly 1,000 artillery pieces per mile, bombarding specific German strongholds. After the bombardments, Soviet infantry advanced from all directions toward the city center. With the support of tanks, flamethrowers, and combat engineers, Soviet troops stormed Berlin by moving through courtyards, basements, subway tunnels, and even sewers. The fighting was brutal, and as the Soviet forces neared the city center, German resistance became even fiercer. Heavily fortified buildings, hidden bunkers, and sewer systems served as German defensive positions, making every meter of Soviet advance costly. On April 28, 1945, after 2 days of intense combat, the Red Army reached the Reichstag, the symbol of German power. This marked the final phase of the battle, the assault on the Reichstag. As the heart of the Nazi regime, the Reichstag was defended by elite German troops. On April 28, when the Soviets launched their attack, the Germans fought with desperation, resisting with great determination. The battle raged for an entire day, continuing into the early hours of April 29. Only after nearly all German defenders were eliminated did the Reichstag fall into Soviet hands. On the following day, April 30, 1945, Soviet soldiers raised the red flag over the Reichstag. That afternoon, to avoid capture by Soviet forces, Adolf Hitler took his own life in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. With the Soviet flag flying over Berlin, Hitler's dream was completely shattered. 2 days later, on May 2, 1945, the remaining German forces in Berlin, upon learning of Hitler's death, began surrendering en masse. Around 380,000 German soldiers were captured, while the rest were eliminated by the Soviets. However, the Red Army also suffered heavy losses, with around 300,000 Soviet casualties, killed and wounded. The Battle of Berlin marked the end of the war between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, effectively bringing World War II in Europe to a close.